The dinner rush at Romano's Italian restaurant was in full chaos when Daniel Parker felt his phone vibrate in his apron pocket for the third time in 10 minutes. He didn't need to look at it to know it was the school nurse calling again about his 6-year-old son Tommy's fever, but he couldn't answer because Section 5 was completely slammed, and his manager had already warned him about taking personal calls during peak hours. Daniel was juggling a tray of scalding pasta dishes when he nearly collided with a woman in an elegant charcoal suit who had somehow bypassed the hostess stand and walked straight into the dining area. She wasn't just any woman. He realized with a sinking feeling she was Victoria Chen, the billionaire tech CEO whose face had been plastered across every business magazine for the past year, and she was staring at him with an intensity that made his hands shake so badly he almost dropped the entire tray. But what froze Daniel completely, what made the noise of the restaurant fade into a distant hum, were the 4 words she whispered as she leaned closer. "Meet your daughter, Daniel." The world tilted sideways as those words penetrated his exhaustion and panic. Daniel managed to set down the tray without catastrophe, his mind racing through impossible scenarios and buried memories. He hadn't seen Victoria in 7 years. Not since that brief, intense summer when he was working. 2 jobs to pay for community college, and she was a rising star in the tech world who had somehow noticed the waiter, who served her coffee every morning at the cafe near her office. They had fallen into something that felt like love, or at least the kind of desperate connection that happens between 2 lonely people who recognize something in each other. But Victoria's career had been exploding. Opportunities calling her to Silicon Valley and Shanghai and London, while Daniel had been drowning in student debt and family obligations. When she had left the city, they had promised to stay in touch, but those promises had dissolved like sugar in rain. He had eventually stopped calling, stopped checking his email for messages that never came, and had convinced himself that she had been a beautiful dream that was never meant to last. If you believe in second chances and the power of truth, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything. Now, let's continue with Daniel's story. Victoria's presence in the restaurant felt surreal, like she had stepped out of a memory and into his current nightmare of overdue bills and single parenthood. Daniel's manager was already shooting him warning glares from across the room, but Victoria touched his arm gently and suggested they talk after his shift. She was staying at the luxury hotel across the street and would wait for him in the lobby bar. Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her that whatever she had come to say was 7 years too late, but the words, "your daughter," kept echoing in his head like a bell he couldn't unring. He nodded mutely and watched her leave, her expensive heels clicking against the worn tile floor. And then he returned to his tables with a smile that felt like it might crack his face in half. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of mechanical motions and spiraling thoughts. Daniel had become a single father 3 years ago when his ex-girlfriend Rachel had decided that motherhood wasn't for her and had left him alone with their then 3-year-old son Tommy. Rachel had been honest about not wanting children, but an unexpected pregnancy and Daniel's desperate hope that they could make it work had resulted in a few years of trying before she finally admitted defeat and walked away. Daniel had been devastated but not entirely surprised, and he had thrown himself into being the best father he could be despite having no idea what he was doing. He worked double shifts at the restaurant, picked up catering gigs on weekends, and survived on 4 hours of sleep and the fierce love he felt for his little boy who had his smile and his stubborn determination. Money was always tight, a constant source of anxiety that followed Daniel like a shadow. Tommy's health had been fragile since birth, prone to infections and mysterious fevers that sent them to urgent care more times than Daniel could count. They had insurance through the restaurant, but it was the kind that covered almost nothing and left Daniel drowning in medical bills he paid off $5 at a time. His apartment was a cramped 1-bedroom where Tommy slept in the actual bedroom while Daniel made do with a futon in the living room. He shopped at thrift stores, clipped coupons religiously, and had perfected the art of making a single chicken last for an entire week of meals. But despite the exhaustion and the financial strain and the bone-deep loneliness of single parenthood, Daniel had never regretted keeping Tommy. His son was the bright center of his universe, the reason he got up every morning and pushed through another day. When Daniel's shift finally ended at 11, he changed out of his stained uniform and walked across the street to the hotel with his heart hammering against his ribs. The lobby bar was all soft lighting and expensive leather furniture, the kind of place where a single cocktail probably cost more than Daniel spent on groceries in a week. Victoria was sitting in a corner booth, and she had changed from her power suit into jeans and a simple sweater that made her look more like the woman he remembered. She had ordered him a beer, remembering after all these years that he preferred local craft brews, and the small gesture made something ache in his chest. Victoria didn't waste time with small talk. She told him that she had a daughter, a 6-year-old named Lily, and that Daniel was her father. The words hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. Victoria explained that she had discovered she was pregnant 2 months after leaving the city, after their relationship had already faded into awkward text messages and missed calls. She had been terrified and overwhelmed, facing the biggest opportunities of her career while carrying a child she hadn't planned for. She had tried to reach Daniel multiple times, had sent emails and left voicemails, but they had somehow never connected. Eventually, she convinced herself that Daniel had moved on and didn't want to be found, and she had made the difficult decision to raise Lily alone. Daniel listened with a growing sense of horror and disbelief. He had never received any emails or calls about a pregnancy. He had changed his phone number that year after a stalker situation with a customer at the cafe, and his email account had been hacked and closed down around the same time. He had tried to find Victoria on social media, but she maintained no personal accounts, only professional profiles managed by her company's PR team. They had somehow missed each other in the chaos of life, and that missed connection had resulted in him losing 6 years of his daughter's life. The injustice of it made him want to scream, but he was too stunned to do anything but sit there with his untouched beer growing warm in his hands. Victoria showed him pictures on her phone, and Daniel found himself staring at a little girl with his dark curly hair and Victoria's sharp, intelligent eyes. Lily was beautiful, smiling in various photos from birthday parties and beach vacations and what looked like a private school playground. She was clearly well cared for, dressed in clothes that Daniel could never afford, surrounded by the kind of opportunities that only unlimited resources could provide. Victoria explained that she had built her company into a billion-dollar empire while raising Lily with the help of nannies and her own mother. That Lily wanted for nothing material, but had started asking difficult questions about her father. Victoria had finally hired investigators to track Daniel down, expecting to find him living a successful life somewhere, perhaps married with other children. Instead, she had discovered him working as a waiter in the same city where they had met, struggling to raise a son as a single father, barely keeping his head above water. The revelation about Tommy seemed to surprise Victoria as much as Lily's existence had surprised Daniel. He explained about Rachel, about the unexpected pregnancy and the relationship that had crumbled under the weight of parenthood, about the past 3 years of solo parenting that had been the hardest and most meaningful of his life. Victoria listened with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read, and when he finished, she dropped another bombshell that made his already spinning world tilt further off its axis. She wanted Lily to know her father, wanted Daniel to be part of their daughter's life. But more than that, she wanted to help him. Not charity, she was quick to clarify, but support for Tommy, opportunities for Daniel, a chance to build something better than the hand-to-mouth existence he had been surviving on. Daniel's pride reared up immediately, that fierce independence that had kept him going through the worst times. He didn't need handouts, didn't want to be anyone's charity case, especially not from the woman who had disappeared from his life and taken his daughter with her. But Victoria cut through his defensiveness with brutal honesty. She told him that Lily deserved to have a father who wasn't so exhausted from survival that he could barely function, that Tommy deserved to have his medical needs met without his father choosing between paying for antibiotics and paying rent, that Daniel himself deserved a chance to be more than a waiter drowning in circumstances beyond his control. She wasn't offering to rescue him, she said. She was offering to be partners in raising their daughter, and that partnership included making sure both of their children had what they needed. The conversation stretched past midnight, with Victoria laying out a plan that seemed simultaneously too good to be true and slightly terrifying in its implications. She would set up a trust fund for Tommy's medical care and education, would help Daniel get training in a field that actually interested him beyond just paying bills, would buy a house with enough space for both children to have rooms when they visited. In exchange, she wanted Daniel to be an active father to Lily, to spend time with her and build a relationship and help her understand where she came from. There would be legal documents and custody arrangements and all the complicated logistics of co-parenting a child they had raised separately for 6 years. But Victoria seemed determined to make it work. Daniel wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to tell Victoria that she couldn't just waltz back into his life with her billions and her plans and expect him to fall in line. But then his phone buzzed with another text from his neighbor, who was watching Tommy, saying his fever had spiked to 104 and maybe Daniel should come home soon. The fear that shot through him was familiar and exhausting, the constant terror that lived in his bones whenever Tommy got sick. The knowledge that a trip to the emergency room would mean another bill he couldn't pay and maybe losing the apartment if he couldn't make rent. He thought about Lily, the daughter he hadn't known existed, who had grown up with every advantage while he had been struggling just to keep Tommy fed and healthy. He thought about the unfairness of it all, but also about the opportunity being offered, the chance to give both children something better. If this story has moved you, if it made you think about the sacrifices parents make and the power of unexpected second chances, please let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps these meaningful stories reach others who need to hear them. Daniel agreed to Victoria's plan, though it felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. The first meeting with Lily was arranged for the following weekend at a neutral location, a park where the children could play while the adults navigated the awkwardness of their situation. Daniel brought Tommy, who was finally recovering from his fever, and watched nervously as his son approached the little girl who was technically his half-sister. The children were cautious at first, but they warmed to each other with the easy adaptability of the young, and within an hour they were laughing together on the swings, while Daniel and Victoria watched from a nearby bench. Victoria admitted that she had been terrified Daniel would reject Lily, would be angry about the years they had lost and refuse to be part of their daughter's life. Daniel admitted that he was still processing everything, still grappling with the complicated emotions of grief for lost time and gratitude for the opportunity to make things right. They talked about logistics and schedules, about how to explain the situation to Lily in age-appropriate ways, about building trust between two people who had once meant something to each other and now had to figure out how to be partners in parenting. Please take a moment to comment below with the word family if you believe that it's never too late to create the family you were meant to have. Over the following months, a new kind of family emerged from the ruins of the old almost relationship. Daniel enrolled in coding classes that Victoria helped arrange, discovering a natural aptitude for programming that reminded him of the dreams he had abandoned years ago. Tommy's health improved dramatically with access to better health care and specialized treatments they had never been able to afford. Lily spent weekends with Daniel and Tommy, and the three of them developed their own rhythms and inside jokes and bedtime routines. Victoria proved to be more than just a checkbook, showing up for school plays and soccer games, learning to braid hair and make pancakes shaped like animals, becoming part of the chaotic, beautiful mess of their blended family. Daniel and Victoria never rekindled their romance, but they built something potentially more valuable, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared love for their children. They learned to communicate honestly, to put the kids first, to navigate disagreements without letting old hurts poison new possibilities. Daniel moved into a real house with a yard where the children could play, started working remotely as a junior developer for Victoria's company, and slowly rebuilt his life from survival mode into something that felt like actually living. The shame he had carried for so long about his circumstances began to lift as he realized that struggling didn't make him a failure. It made him human. One evening, a year after that surreal night in the restaurant. Daniel was putting both children to bed in their shared room during one of Victoria's business trips. Tommy and Lily had demanded a sleepover, and they were curled up in sleeping bags giggling about something only they understood. As Daniel kissed them both goodnight, Lily grabbed his hand and said with the casual certainty of a 7-year-old that she was glad he was her daddy and that Tommy was her brother, and that their family was the best family ever, even though it looked different from other families. Tommy agreed enthusiastically, adding that Victoria made the best pancakes and could he please have some tomorrow. Daniel left their room with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the sheer improbable beauty of how his life had transformed. The single dad waiter who had been so focused on survival that he had almost missed the billionaire CEO in line had been given an impossible gift. A daughter he didn't know existed. A second chance to build something meaningful, and a reminder that family wasn't always about biology or planning or doing everything right. Sometimes family was about showing up, about choosing to build bridges instead of walls, about loving imperfectly but completely. As he sat on his front porch watching the stars, Daniel thought about that night when Victoria had walked into the restaurant and whispered words that changed everything. He had been terrified and angry and overwhelmed, but he had said yes to possibility instead of hiding behind his pride. And that yes had opened doors he never could have imagined, leading him to a life he never could have planned but wouldn't trade for anything in the world.